Hey, how's it going? So we're going to start a new series, just a little short one tonight. This is called Why Barabar Breaks Archaeology. When people hear the phrase Barabar Caves, they imagine something primitive. They imagine men with chisels. They imagine centuries of labor. They imagine rough stone, uneven walls, mistakes hidden by time. But the moment you actually look at Barabar, not the story, not the label, not the assumption, that entire picture collapses. Because Barabar does not behave like a cave. It behaves like an instrument. And that single fact quietly breaks almost everything archaeology assumes about ancient capability. Let's start with the surface. The granite walls inside Barabar are not just smooth, they are mirror polished. Not pretty smooth, not well finished for their time, mirror smooth. Flat to within fractions of a millimeter across spans of several meters. So reflective that modern visitors can see themselves clearly in solid granite. Now pause there for a second. Granite is one of the hardest natural stones on earth. Modern stone workers using diamond tools, industrial abrasives, and powered machinery still struggle to achieve finishes like this. And when they do, it's slow, expensive, and energy intensive. So the first question is not mystical, it's mechanical. How do you produce that surface at this scale? And more importantly, why is there no evidence of the process that supposedly produced it? Because when you shape stone with chisels, you leave traces. Always. Microscopic striations, impact fractures, directional tool marks. At Barabar, they aren't there. Not hidden, not worn away. They are absent. That alone should stop the conversation, but it doesn't, because we're trained to normalize impossibility instead of interrogating it. Now let's move to geometry. These chambers are not irregular, they are not organic, they are not exploratory, they are precise. Barrel vaults that hold curvature within tight tolerances, rectilinear chambers whose walls meet at exact angles. Arches that are perfectly circular, not approximated, not close enough. If you've ever worked stone, you know this matters. Perfect curves do not emerge accidentally. They require either advanced measurement or a process where the material itself conforms to a field. So the question isn't, could they do it? The question is, what method produces this result naturally? Now add acoustics. This is where Barabar stops being defensible under conventional explanations. When you speak inside these chambers, the sound does not dissipate normally. It reflects cleanly, it sustains, it reinforces itself. Certain frequencies ring, others vanish. There are standing wave behaviors inside these spaces that match deliberate acoustic engineering. The same principles used in concert halls, ionic chambers, and resonance labs. This is not incidental. Acoustics are not a cosmetic feature. They are the direct outcome of shape, surface, and material interacting. And at Barabar, all three align: hard stone, mirror polish, exact geometry. That combination doesn't happen by accident. It happens when sound matters. Now let's talk timelines. Conventional archaeology says these chambers were carved with iron tools, slowly, over long periods, possibly generations. But that story doesn't survive basic logistics. To polish granite to this degree using abrasion alone would require massive labor, enormous time, huge quantities of abrasive material, visible waste, and visible process traces. Where's the debris? Where are the unfinished chambers? Where are the failed attempts? They don't exist. Think about it. No failed attempts. Barabar appears fully realized, not experimental. And that matters. Because experimental cultures leave mistakes. Mastery cultures leave consistency. Now let's add the quiet question no one wants to ask. If these were simply caves, why granite? Why not sandstone? Why not limestone? Why not something easier? Granite is not a friendly choice unless you want its properties. And granite has very specific properties. It's crystalline. It contains quartz. It responds to vibration. It stores resonance. That's not mystical. That's material science. Modern engineers exploit those exact properties in oscillator sensors and frequency stable components. So again, the pattern sharpens. Precision surfaces, exact geometry, deliberate acoustics, hard crystalline material. Each of these alone would raise an eyebrow. Together they form a constraint set. And here's the key insight. Constraints don't lie. When multiple constraints are satisfied simultaneously, they tell you what kind of system you're looking at. And Barabar's constraints do not describe a cave. They describe a tuned environment. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This does not require mystical assumptions. This does not require lost superpowers. It does not require fantasy. It only requires one thing, that ancient builders understood resonance better than we assume. Because when you understand resonance, you stop fighting matter and you start guiding it. Modern engineering always does this. We just don't apply it to stone. We use resonance to shape metals, clean components, fracture materials, transmit energy, store information. So the real question becomes uncomfortable. Why is it acceptable to assume advanced knowledge in modern contexts, but impossible to imagine it in ancient ones? That's not science, that's cultural bias. Barabar forces a reckoning. Either these structures are flukes beyond explanation, or a model of ancient capability is incomplete. Here's the critical point. If Barabar were only site like this, you could dismiss it, but it isn't. Similar precision appears in other Indian cave systems, massive granite structures elsewhere, sites separated by geography, but united by technique, which tells us something important. This wasn't a one-off, it was a method. And methods imply systems. So at the end of this monologue, I'm not asking you to believe anything extraordinary. I'm asking you to notice something simple. Barabar does not behave like a cave. It behaves like something built with intention, precision, and understanding. In the next monologue, we'll ask the obvious question, or the obvious follow-up. If this wasn't carved the way we're told, what kind of technology would make Barabar normal instead of impossible? That's where things are going to get interesting. And we'll pick up in part 2 in the next video. Hope you have a great night. Namaste. All right, here we go. Part 2 of the Barabar Codex, or the Barabar Caves. The djed isn't a symbol, it's a component. In the first monologue, we did something very simple. We didn't speculate. We didn't jump ahead. We just looked at Barabar and asked whether it behaves like what we were told it is. And the answer was clear. It doesn't behave like a cave. So now we move to the next logical question. Not a mystical one, not a historical one, but an engineering question. If Barabar wasn't carved in the way we're told, what kind of technology would make Barabar normal instead of impossible? That question changes how we look at everything. Because once you ask it honestly, you stop trying to force an old explanations to fit. You start looking for components. Like I keep telling you, it's a system. And this is where the djed enters the conversation. Most people hear the word djed and immediately think symbol, an Egyptian glyph, a religious icon, a metaphor for stability. But that assumption comes from modern categorization, not ancient design logic. Ancient systems didn't separate symbol, function, and instruction the way that we do today. A thing could be all three at once. And in this case, the djed is not decorative, it's structural. The djed is best understood as a phase spine, a vertical resonant column designed to stabilize, amplify, and translate energy across different media. Not magic, not mythology, a component. Every complex system has one. In the human body, it's the spine. In architecture, it's the load-bearing column. In electronics, it's the oscillator or clock. In physics, it's the reference axis. Without it, nothing stays coherent. Now think about Barabar again. You have hard crystalline stone, mirror-polished surfaces, precise geometry, controlled acoustics. What's missing? A way to lock phase. Because sound alone doesn't do this. Geometry alone doesn't do this. Stone alone certainly doesn't do this. What you need is a device that anchors resonance, selects frequencies, maintains stability, couples different domains together. That's what the djed does. The djed is not the system. It is the central stabilizer inside a larger system. This matters, so let's slow down here. The biggest mistake people make is imagining ancient technology as force-based. Hammers, levers, brute force, effort. But once you understand resonance, force becomes the least efficient option. Resonance lets you guide matter instead of fighting it. Modern technology already works this way. We use resonance to fracture materials, clean precision components, transmit energy wirelessly, store timing information, and stabilize systems. The only difference is the medium. We do it in metal circuits and fields. They did it in stone, water, and sound. The djed sits at the center of that approach. Structurally, it's vertical for a reason. Verticality isn't symbolic, it's functional. A vertical resonator couples earth-based currents upward, supports standing wave formation, maintains directional coherence, and allows frequency translation. This is why the djed appears again and again as a column, not a disk, not a slab or a sphere. It's an axis. Now let's address the uncomfortable part. If the djed were just symbolic, it wouldn't need precision. It wouldn't need the material to be so specific. It wouldn't need internal structure. But everywhere the djed appears in serious context, it is consistent, columnar, segmented, proportioned, often associated with stonework chambers or ritualized sound. That's not how symbols behave, that's how components behave. It's a system. Here's the key insight that ties this back to Barabar. The cave itself does not generate resonance, it shapes it. The djed provides the reference. Think of it this way. The chamber is a violin body. The stone is the wood. The geometry is the curvature. But without a string under tension, nothing plays. The djed is the string. It's the thing that allows energy to enter the system in a controlled way instead of dispersing randomly. This also explains something that archaeology never addresses. Why would builders go to such extremes to perfect surfaces that are rarely touched? Why polish granite to mirror finish inside dark chambers? Because surface quality matters for wave behavior. Roughness scatters energy. Smoothness preserves it. If you want sound to reflect cleanly, form standing waves, interact with material lattice, you need precision. And if you want that precision to persist, you need stability. That's the djed's role. It doesn't carve the stone by itself. It doesn't do the work alone. It makes the work possible. And this is where we need to correct a modern misunderstanding. Ancient systems didn't separate technology and consciousness. Humans were not external operators pushing buttons. They were part of a control loop. The djed does not function in isolation. It responds to sound input, rhythmic timing, operator position, coherent intention. Not because of mysticism, but because living systems are adaptive. Modern engineers are rediscovering this through biofeedback, neural entrainment, and adaptive control systems. Ancient builders already knew it. So the picture that starts to form is not a lost super technology. It's something more subtle and more challenging. A system that uses resonance instead of force, uses coherence instead of power, uses humans as regulators instead of labor. That kind of system leaves different evidence. It doesn't leave piles of debris. It doesn't leave tool scars. It doesn't leave half-finished failures. It leaves precision. And when that precision survives thousands of years, it looks impossible because we're judging it by the wrong model. So let's pause here. Now we have a structure that doesn't behave like a cave, a material choice that favors resonance, a surface finish that preserves waves, a geometry that supports standing fields, and a missing component that explains why it all works. That component is the djed. In the next monologue, we're going to take one more step inward because the djed alone doesn't explain everything. The chamber itself is doing more than containing sound. It's shaping consciousness. And once you see how geometry, surface, water, and resonance work together, you realize something important. The cave is not housing the system. The cave is the instrument. And that's where we go next. And I'll just tell you this as well. So I don't think I get into it in this monologue here, but I'll do another one or a follow-up on this one where I go over how they did all the exact tools and how they did that. And then I will also go over the individuals who actually built all this. They were called the Vimana Architects Guild. Those are the individuals, and they made them all over. They were about 12 to 15,000 years ago, essentially. Let me see here. So here's how they preserve the knowledge, okay? Triple encoded system. Oral tradition, mantra-based memory systems. They could recite construction manuals verbatim. Architectural encoding, building proportions contained mathematical constants. Acoustic storage, certain chamber resonances would play back construction knowledge when specific tones were sung. The library wasn't in books. The Kailasa temple itself, full construction manual encoded in its dimensions. The Barabar Caves acoustic training manual is literally what it is. It's an acoustic training manual. The Great Pyramids chambers, astronomical geophysical databank, global network of resonance nodes that together contained a complete pre-fall science. And they have the Vara cutter, sound machines, solar tools, earth knowledge instruments, a number of different things. All the stuff on how they did it. I have all kinds of stuff, but we'll finish up with part 3 and 4 with this series, and then we'll see if you guys want to go into how it all connects to everything else, like all the big sites, or go to something else. All right, this is the Barabar Codex, Barabar Caves, part 3. The chamber is the instrument. And before we get started on this one, so I want you to know that, well, then how come there's no platform? Although the floors are smooth, there would be some type of trace if a djed pillar was there, right? That's what I would expect people to think. The djed pillar was used when you were making it, and it would be used at times, but it was portable. It was not something that you wouldn't have it in there when you were trying to use it to accelerate your consciousness. You used it to create the structure and the harmonics of it. And to exactly create it how you want it. Now I'll tell you how the tools and things of that nature as well, but we'll go into the chamber as an instrument now. Here we go. Up to this point, we've done something very deliberate. First, we established that Barabar does not behave like a cave. Then we identified a missing component, the djed. That makes the system coherent instead of impossible. Now we move one layer deeper, because even with a stabilizing phase spine, something else is doing the real work, the stone itself, the chamber itself. This is where most interpretations fail, because we're conditioned to think of space as empty and objects as active. But in resonance-based systems, space is never empty. Space is shaped. And when space is shaped correctly, it becomes an instrument. This is the key shift. The Barabar chambers are not containers for sound. They are wave guides. They are not rooms where resonance happens. They are structures that force resonance to behave in specific ways. And once you see that, everything else snaps into alignment. Let's start with geometry. In ordinary rooms, sound disperses. It reflects randomly. It decays quickly. But in Barabar, the geometry prevents that. Curved surfaces are not aesthetic choices. They are functional. Barrel vaults, circular arches, and carefully proportioned walls do one thing extremely well. They prevent chaotic reflection. Instead of scattering energy, they guide it. This is basic acoustics. Concert halls are shaped in this way for a reason. So are wave tanks. So are resonant cavities and physics labs. And in every one of those cases, surface quality matters just as much as shape. Which brings us back to the polish. Mirror polish is not decoration. It is wave preservation. A rough surface absorbs and scatters energy. A smooth surface reflects it coherently. When the surface becomes smooth enough, something interesting happens. The boundary between air and stone stops behaving like a barrier and starts behaving like an interface. Sound pressure couples into the stone itself, and granite, because of its crystalline structure, responds. Quartz doesn't just sit there, it vibrates. It stores oscillation, it releases it, it stabilizes frequency. This is why granite is used in modern precision equipment. Again, not mysticism, materials science. So now we have a shaped cavity, mirror smooth boundaries, crystalline stone. That alone creates a resonant environment. But Barabar goes further because the chamber doesn't just shape sound in air, it couples sound into matter. This is where water enters the system. Water is not incidental, it is not symbolic, it is not ritual filler. Water is the most effective acoustic coupling medium available. It transmits pressure waves far more efficiently than air. It allows energy to reach microscopic scales. It creates cavitation. And cavitation is not gentle. When pressure waves pass through water at the right frequencies, microscopic bubbles form and collapse. I'm sure you guys have seen that. Those collapses produce localized temperatures and pressures high enough to alter material structure. This is not hypothetical. It's used today in ultrasonic cleaning, surface treatment, and materials processing. Now imagine that process applied deliberately. A stone surface submerged in water, standing waves established in the chamber, pressure nodes and antinodes locked in place by geometry. The antinodes cavitation repeatedly impacts the same microscopic regions, not randomly, precisely. Over time, this produces something extraordinary. Not abrasion, not grinding, a phase transition. The surface reorganizes at the molecular level. Crystal boundaries relax. The outer layer vitrifies. That's how you get a mirror finish without scratches. That's why there are no tool marks. Nothing scraped the surface. The surface reformed itself. And once you understand this, a lot of things become obvious in retrospect. Why the polish is uniform even in hard to reach places. Why corners are as perfect as open walls. Why the finish is consistent across entire chambers. Because the chamber wasn't worked point by point, it was worked as a whole. This is what an instrument does. It applies a field, not a force. Now let's talk about consciousness carefully and precisely. This is not about belief, it's about control systems. And any resonant system requires feedback. Without feedback, resonance runs away or collapses. Modern systems use sensors and processors. Ancient systems used living operators. Humans were not there to push stone. They were there to regulate timing, rhythm, and phase. breath, voice, posture, position. These are not mystical gestures. They are ways of modulating frequency input. Your body already does this constantly. Your nervous system is a timing engine. Your breath sets rhythm. Your voice produces coherent oscillation. When multiple operators synchronize, something measurable happens. Noise drops. Signal coherence rises. Modern science calls this entrainment. Ancient builders simply used it. Now we can say this clearly. The chamber is the instrument. The djed stabilizes it. Water couples energy into matter. Humans regulate the process. No part is optional. Remove any one element and the system collapses back into brute force. This also explains why these chambers feel different to people today. Visitors often report unusual acoustics, altered perception of sound, a sense of pressure or stillness, heightened focus. That's not imagination. That's what happens when you step into a resonant cavity tuned for human scale frequencies. Even without activation, the geometry remains. The instrument is still there. It's just dormant. So let's pause and take inventory. We now understand that Barabar is not a cave, a shelter, a decorative temple. It is a precision-shaped, resonant chamber designed to shape sound, preserve coherence, couple vibration into stone, interact with human physiology. That alone places it far outside conventional archaeological categories. And yet we still haven't gone big. We haven't talked about networks. We haven't talked about other sites. We haven't talked about Earth scale systems. We've stayed local. And even at this level, the conclusion is unavoidable. Barabar was built by people who understood how geometry, material, sound, water, and consciousness interact. That is not primitive knowledge. This is integrated knowledge. The final monologue of this series, we're going to zoom out just one more step. Because once you recognize Barabar as an instrument, a new question appears. Why here? Why this location? Why this alignment? Why does this pattern appear elsewhere? That's where Barabar stops being a site and becomes a node. That's where we'll go next. Hope you have a great night. Namaste. All right, this is part 4 and the last part of the Barabar Codex or the Barabar Caves. Barabar is a node, not a site. Up until now, we've stayed disciplined. We didn't speculate beyond what the structure itself demanded. We didn't jump into global claims. We didn't invoke myths to explain mechanics. We simply followed the logic outward. First, Barabar didn't behave like a cave. Then we saw that it required a stabilizing component. Then we realized the chamber itself was the instrument. And once you reach that point, a new question appears on its own. Not how it works, but why here? Because instruments are not placed randomly. You don't build a concert hall wherever there's empty land. You don't place a radio tower without considering coverage. You don't install a sensor without reference to see what it's actually sensing. So the moment Barabar becomes an instrument, it also becomes a location-dependent system. And that's the pivot. Barabar is not a standalone artifact. It is positioned. Let's begin with something simple and overlooked. These caves are not in the middle of nowhere. They sit within a specific geological context. The granite there is usually uniform. The bedrock is stable. The surrounding terrain supports long-term structural integrity. That's the physical layer. But it doesn't stop there. Barabar also sits at a convergence of natural pathways, not roads, not trade routes, but energy flows. Water movement, subsurface conductivity, telluric currents. You don't need esoteric language to understand this. Modern engineers already map these things when they place underground infrastructure, design power systems, or locate sensitive instruments. Ancient builders did the same, just with different tools. Now consider something else. Barabar is not alone. It belongs to a family of sites. Caves elsewhere in India share similar polish, similar geometry, similar acoustic behavior. These are not copies, they are variations, which is exactly what you expect from a network. A network does not repeat itself identically, it adapts to local conditions while preserving function. This is the moment where the isolated genius explanation collapses, because isolated genius leaves singular masterpieces, networks leave patterns. And Barabar fits a pattern. But here's the crucial restraint. We are not yet talking about planetary grid. We are talking about local coherence. Think of it this way. Before you build a global system, you test locally. You establish nodes. You verify stability. Barabar behaves like a stabilized node. A place where resonance can be generated, coherence can be maintained, human physiology can be entrained, material can be shaped predictably. That alone is significant. But now notice the timing. Barabar was not continuously used. It wasn't expanded endlessly. It wasn't turned into a mega complex. It appears complete. That tells us something important. This wasn't about scale, it was about function, which means Barabar likely served as a training site, a calibration site, a reference site, a place where techniques were learned, tested, and stabilized. That would explain the precision, the completeness, the lack of modification over time. You don't keep changing a reference instrument. Now let's talk about alignment carefully here, okay? These chambers are not oriented randomly. Their axes matter. Orientation affects sound propagation, airflow, light entry, seasonal interaction. Modern architecture accounts for all this. So did ancient builders. But when multiple sites show intentional orientation, something else emerges. Coordination. Not global yet, but deliberate. This is where the idea of a node becomes unavoidable. A node is not a center of power, it's a point of function. It exists to receive, stabilize, transmit. Barabar receives geological stability. It stabilizes resonance. It transmutes coherence locally. That's enough. You don't need to invoke lost civilizations or advanced empires to reach this conclusion. You only need to accept that ancient builders thought in systems, not monuments. And systems thinking changes everything. Because once you see Barabar as a node, a new kind of archaeology becomes possible. Instead of asking who built this, you ask what role did this play? Instead of asking what tools did they use, you ask what constraints were they solving for? Instead of asking why is it so precise, you ask what function requires this level of precision? Those are better questions, and when you ask better questions, different answers emerge. Now let's be clear about where this monologue ends. We are not yet mapping the earth. We are not yet linking pyramids, mountains, or distant sites. That comes next. What we are doing here is establishing a principle that ancient builders were not scattering wonders across the landscape. They were placing instruments, and instruments imply networks. Even if you don't know the full network yet, you can recognize a node by its behavior. Barabar behaves like a node. It is stable, precise, complete, function-driven, intentionally placed. That is not accidental, that is symbolic. That is architectural intelligence. So as we close this 4-part series, here's the realization to carry forward. Barabar is not a mystery because we lack evidence. It is a mystery because we've been using the wrong lens. When you stop treating ancient structures as primitive attempts at religion and start treating them as components in larger systems, a completely different story appears. A story where sound matters, geometry matters, material matters, placement matters, and where human consciousness is not worshipped but integrated. In the next phase, not this monologue, but the work that follows, we will take that lens and apply it outward to other sites, to alignments, to terrain, to the earth itself, not as myth, as infrastructure. But that only works because we did this in order. Because without understanding Barabar as an instrument and as a node, the larger picture would collapse into speculation. Now it won't. Now it has foundation. And that completes it. And the Venema Architects Guild they built so many different things. They had these humongous bronze bells that were continent communicating. The tools they used were the djed pillar resonator, which softened the stone, a sonic chisel, phase boundary compression, harmonic mapping. I can go over all these things, how they all work, if you'd like to know. But even more important, let me tell you about this. So they knew this compression cycle was coming because their calendars were resonance-based. Their astronomy was resonance-based. They knew all this was happening. They were already past the 12,900 year compression cycle, and they were already into it. It just hadn't completely went to parasitic linear time yet. And so they did bury all these things, like Göbekli Tepe. That was a beacon, a resonance beacon. All these things are connected, and I can tell you how all of them work. But I want you to know. So there were these emergency preservation protocols. They selected indestructible mediums, quartz veins, and granite mountains, using focused sunlight through crystal array, etched data at a molecular level, encoding method, prime number spirals, each prime a specific concept. Recovery key is the chamber dimensions themselves. Measure them and derive the primes. Here are the 7 emergency caches that are still undiscovered. The Himalayan cache, a complete resonance mathematics near Kailash. Andean cache, geological manipulation techniques near Ollantaytambo. Egyptian cache, consciousness science under the Sphinx right paw. Antarctic cache, climate cycle knowledge under the ice shelf. Gobi cache, genetic preservation data underground river system. Sahara cache, hydraulical engineering under sand seas. Pacific cache, navigation star maps, submarine mountains. Those are some places where you might find some information that has been embedded 10, 12,000 years ago for us to finally understand today. I'll leave it at that. We'll probably go into some of the Vimana Guild, talk about that stuff, and then I'll go in. I'm not going to cover all the sites. It would be a 10,000 video thing, but I'll probably do 5 or 10 videos. I'll talk about all the major ones, how they all work together, Angkor Wat, all of them. Hope you have a great day. Namaste.